making it the fastest growing industry in the United States today. And the growth we've seen in recent years is striking. And in 2011, we hit a big marker. Annual installations of U.S. solar capacity broke the 1 gigawatt threshold for the first time. But not only broke the 1 gigawatt, we crushed it. We did 1.8 gigawatts last year.
And today, solar is quickly... becoming utilities' fastest growing electricity resource. And in fact, utilities interconnected more than 62,000 PV systems to the grid last year. That represents growth of 38% over 2010, and we know the numbers for 2012 are going to be far more impressive.
And SPI is even more social than ever. You can tweet to your followers and follow the conversations of your fellow solar tweets at the SPI hashtag, #SPI2012, and join our Solar Power International group on LinkedIn to get all the latest updates on the action at SPI.
And SPI has also gone mobile, so make sure you download the SPI2012 mobile app on your smartphone or tablet and use this app to create your own personalized show agenda, to bookmark exhibitors you want to visit, to receive text alerts on updates about the show, and to learn about important show news. And you can use the My SPI scheduler to connect with other SPI attendees and exhibitors. We'll also be taking your feedback this year during our concurrent sessions electronically. So what that means is tomorrow through Thursday, you'll see scanners at the entrance to each of the educational sessions. And by scanning your badge, that allows us to immediately email you a session-specific evaluation after the session. And all you need to do is take a quick minute, fill out a short evaluation, which will then help us create a better program for next year's SPI and other events put on by SEPA and SEIA.
But now you know that our business has matured. We're facing new challenges today. This year, SPI looks specifically at how we can take the momentum that we've gained and use it to protect what has made solar the fastest growing industry in the United States.
Today, Rhone and I will share our views of the current and future state of solar energy in the U.S. This session will also feature a panel of solar superstars from a broad cross-section of the energy industry who will share their vision for solar energy here in America.
But before we bring them on stage, I would like to recognize some of the champions that made this conference possible. Once the exhibit hall opens tomorrow morning at 9 a.m., you will see nearly 900 suppliers that have all invested in solar and envision its brilliant future. Please join me in giving special thanks to those companies that have made the most generous investment as sponsors of solar power. Please make sure you take the time to visit them on the show floor tomorrow.
We especially appreciate our new terawatt sponsor, SMA Solar Technology. Please take some time to visit them during SPI on the show floor in booth 2010 and find out just how they are leading the solar industry in innovation and cutting-edge offerings today.
Let's hear it for SMA.
Thank the SPI Advisory Council of Industry Thought Leaders. This council sorted through more than 800 proposals to craft a program to deliver you a cutting-edge learning experience. So thank you to the Advisory Council.
So now it's time to get into the meat of this afternoon's plenary session, and I'm going to turn it over to Julia to share her perspective. Ladies and gentlemen, Julia Hamm.
There are an indefinite number of stories about the future. Our purpose is to tell those that matter.
So last year at SPI, I told a story about the future. I took the audience forward on a journey 20 years into the future as the CEO of Tomorrow Power and Light, a fictitious electric utility operating in the year 2031. Last year, I played out one possible scenario for what the future of solar power could look like here in the U.S. The main takeaway was that under the right circumstances, it would be feasible for an electric utility 20 years in the future to obtain 30% of its electric power from solar energy, while maintaining a healthy business, a healthy grid, and a healthy relationship with the solar industry. Over the past year, I've given that speech again multiple times to utility audiences across the country, and I want you to know something. I want you to know that the utility industry did not react as if I were presenting some crazy fantasyland scenario. In fact, most of the utilities who have heard me give that speech not only believe the scenario could easily be reality 20 years from now, they are, in fact, quite optimistic that it will happen. But scenarios are simply constructed stories about the future. Every scenario represents a different but plausible outcome. What I laid out last year is just one of those many different possible scenarios. Today, I'd like to take you on a journey to 3 alternative versions of the future, along 3 possible paths that solar might take. My objective today is to show you how different forces can impact which of these futures become reality. In my first, but hopefully very unlikely scenario, growth of solar markets will have stalled completely. Most of us in this room will have found a new career in a different industry, unfortunately. Solar energy will have remained a fringe player, representing less than 2% of the overall electricity portfolio. In my second scenario, we'll probably all be sitting here, literally, in the SPI2012 general session, struggling with many of the same old issues that the solar industry has been facing since the 1970s. Solar will have continued to grow, but at a pace that will have only gotten it to somewhere between 5 and 10% of the electricity mix. But in my third scenario, this is the one you're going to like. This is the one where everyone in this room will be loving life, walking, driving up and down streets across America, and seeing solar on roofs, parking structures, industrial sites, basically everywhere you look. Solar will truly be living up to its potential and will provide as much as 30% of the nation's electricity needs. As I walked out onto the stage this morning, you heard a quote from Lawrence Wilkinson, who is a pioneer of the scenario planning technique and author of numerous books and papers on the subject. His strategies have been widely used by some of the world's largest corporations. In an article for Wired magazine, Lawrence wrote, "We look out into the future, trying our best to make wise decisions, only to find ourselves staring into the teeth of ferocious and widespread uncertainties. Rather than getting overwhelmed by those uncertainties, it's valuable for us to take a step back and examine the various potential outcomes of those uncertainties." So today, I'd like to talk about 4 areas of uncertainty that I believe will factor heavily into the future of solar energy: social dynamics, political issues, technological issues, and economic issues. The first, social dynamics, has played a big role in the success of solar to date, with many people adopting, as we all know, solar for reasons other than purely economic ones. But even as solar becomes more and more affordable, social dynamics will remain important. For example, how society reacts to and embraces what I'll refer to as the energy information age fits into this category. Earlier this year, the Green Button Initiative was launched, with the common sense idea that electricity customers should be able to securely download their easy-to-understand energy usage information. Armed with this kind of information, customers can use a growing array of new web and smartphone tools to make informed energy decisions. Customers can even use fun and innovative apps to compete against their social media friends to save energy and lower their carbon emissions. But the products offered by many of the companies who make the software and applications relevant to Green Button don't yet fully incorporate functionality today for customers who've already gone solar. So what does this mean? This means the solar industry really has to take a step back and make the time to engage in these types of forward-looking initiatives and participate in partnerships with providers of new technologies to ensure that customers participating in this new energy information age don't unintentionally leave solar behind or scrambling to catch up. Now onto the second area of uncertainty, political issues. You'll hear from Rhone shortly about the really ugly nature of solar in today's political landscape leading up to the election. While we all aspire to a unified national strategy and vision for solar, today's political reality makes that a really daunting challenge. But on the flip side, solar can play a very critical role in meeting the needs of state and local governments. So today, what I ask all of you is, what can each of us do to help gain traction at that level of government? You'll also hear from Rhone about efforts to modify net metering as we know it today. It is true, let's be real, it is true that utilities generally are not in favor of net metering, largely because they recognize its limitations. Net metering is a great policy for today in many cases. And it's a great policy for the less than 2% scenario that none of us want to see be the reality of 20 years from now. And with modest accommodation, it is a reasonably workable policy up to a point. But it's not a policy that's going to get us to a 30% solar scenario here in the US. If anywhere near 30% of electric customers were to net meter under today's regulatory framework and utility rate structures, utilities could not reliably and cost-effectively build or maintain the infrastructure that solar energy relies upon. I know what many of you are thinking. Many of you are thinking, is it really so bad if utilities disappear? Well, without widespread deployment of storage, who would provide power at times when solar electricity wasn't being generated? Who would balance customers' imports and exports of power? What would be the impact on customers who could not go solar? And so what I ask is, isn't it in the best interest of everyone, which includes both the utility industry and the solar industry, to invest the time and effort today to develop a regulatory structure that allows for a new, long-term, sustainable utility solar business or utility business model? Thank you. We're talking about a business model that encourages customers capable of installing solar to do so. One which rewards utilities to innovate and create a platform in which solar is fully leveraged for its strengths, and one which ensures that the costs and benefits are fairly distributed. What if, let's say, for example, over the next decade, complete nationwide utility deregulation were to occur, resulting in plug-and-play utilities that were designed to welcome and encourage home and business owners to plug their own electricity generators into the grid? What if utilities were no longer in the business of, losing my mic here, sorry, in the business of selling power to customers, but rather made money by providing access to the grid and providing the ancillary services necessary to maintain a functioning and reliable energy network? This discussion leads us nicely into the third area of uncertainty, technological issues. Most of the important technological issues relate to how solar energy will integrate with and add value to the grid. Storage, advanced inverters, performance monitoring and metering equipment, forecasting software, these are all things that fall into that category. Imagine for a moment that, as I said earlier, nationwide utility deregulation does occur, and utilities are playing in the future the new role I described as a network operator. What if utilities in that situation offered new technological options, like a DC-ready utility service interface for each customer? What if utilities built locally centralized inverters and energy storage into the grid at the community level so that each PV system didn't require its own? These are just a couple of examples of what could be technological components of a new age grid that would complement a whole new role for utilities of the future, while making it easier and more cost-effective to add substantially more solar. The fourth uncertainty is economic issues. One of those is the future of fuel prices over the long term. Everybody knows the price of natural gas today is very low, but looking back just to 2008, it was 4 times its current cost. Coal, plentiful and relatively inexpensive today, but is one of the major energy sources in developing countries like China and India. Eventually, that demand and any potential future major action on carbon regulation will cause the price to go up. For many years, conventional generation has taken advantage of subsidies. But the costs of most of those subsidies have been socialized through taxes, whereas today, the costs for solar incentives are often borne by utility ratepayers, which significantly complicates the equation. So looking into the future, there are big uncertainties around what will happen to all types of energy subsidies, both for conventional and alternative sources of generation. And how tax reform might impact the cost of all energy resources is another big unknown. Another economic angle to take a look at returns us to the topic of business models. I already described one possible scenario where utilities might no longer provide power, but instead serve as a grid network operator. Turning our attention to Italy actually provides a glimpse into a completely different but equally plausible alternative. Enel is the 3rd largest utility in Europe, and it has created a franchising network of solar installers. Each of these solar installer franchisees receives an exclusive development area within Enel's service territory, along with an expansive business support network from the utility. So Enel is able to benefit from collecting a franchise fee and playing a role in the development of distributed PV within its service territory, while the local solar installers are provided the resources they need to truly thrive. Today there's over 750 installer franchisees in the Enel network, so it's a really interesting business model to think about. I've spent the past few minutes talking about a variety of uncertainties that could take varying paths that would impact the future. But most of these uncertainties actually can be boiled down into two overarching categories. The first is the level of support that solar energy will receive in the future. And the second is the level of partnership that will occur between players in the energy space. If nothing changes and we continue with the status quo, sorry to say it's very likely we could be on the path to one of the less than desirable scenarios. Today, solar energy, unfortunately, is a very highly politicized issue. The momentum for domestic price on carbon has stalled. Home and business owners just still don't quite yet understand or fully embrace solar energy. So basically, today we have no widespread comprehensive support solutions. Solar companies and vendors of technologies that will be critical to the long-term success of solar are not yet fully integrating their visions and products. Basically, there's no widespread culture of partnership either. In order to achieve the 30% solar scenario, or one equally or even more appealing, we must strive towards a future that has substantial comprehensive support for solar energy, that includes sound federal, state, and local energy policies and regulation, and increased public awareness and acceptance. Making this scenario a reality also requires a strong partnership culture, where collaboration exists between the solar industry and providers of other related technologies, and between electric utilities and solar installers. I'm sure last week many of you watched from your couch as Bill Clinton spoke on the theme of cooperation during his DNC speech, and we will all have the honor of hearing from him in person on this issue later this week. And when it comes to the future of solar energy, I could not agree more with Bill Clinton on the importance of cooperation and collaboration. I know in the year 2032, we are all indeed still sitting here in the SPI general session, but that we have hundreds of thousands of colleagues here with us, and that we are contemplating a whole new set of topics resulting from the fact that solar has reached 30% of the nation's electricity portfolio. And I hope as I've talked about various uncertainties that could impact the future, you've come to realize that while some of them are out of your control, others you can indeed influence. As President Clinton says, the future is not an inheritance, it is an opportunity and an obligation. Thank you.
You know, so we sat down at the dining room table, and I asked her that night to read the opening lines. It is a classic, and we all remember it. Starts off, it was the best of times, and it was the worst of times. And I'm sitting there thinking, as she's reading this, I'm like, oh my gosh, this is the solar industry. And I have to say that out loud. And she looks at me, she goes, this book's about solar energy? And I'm like, oh God. I'm like, no, French Revolution, other stuff. Like, you know, sorry, just like that. But as she continued to read, I realized that there's more to this opening line than just those two first phrases. And I want to read it to you because I think it's strangely prophetic in many ways. It continues on to say that it was an age of wisdom, and it was an age of foolishness. It was the season of light and the season of darkness. We had everything before us, and we had nothing before us. And as I heard her saying these words, it dawned on me there's no literary quote that could be more applicable to the solar industry than this line from The Tale of Two Cities. So I want to start off this afternoon by telling you a little bit about the best of times and our current age of wisdom. For even in the worst economic conditions in a generation, our industry is growing. As many of you may have seen from today's Wall Street Journal, despite the political rhetoric, our industry is a bright spot in the economy. Today, SEIA, along with GTM Research, is releasing our Solar Market Insights second quarter report. And here's what it says. In the second quarter, we installed 742 megawatts across the United States. That is 45% more than what we installed in the first quarter of this year, and more than double the second quarter's record levels in 2011. We installed 477 megawatts of PV and CSP and CPV in utility-scale solar projects. And we also saw residential solar grow, led by California, Arizona, and New Jersey. As of the end of the second quarter in the United States, we now have 5,700 megawatts of installed solar electric capacity. This is enough electricity to power almost 1 million homes in the United States. And this year, we fully expect to install 3.2 gigawatts of new solar here in America. And as you can see from these slides, we as an industry continue to open up new markets throughout the country by working with policymakers and utilities. Most of you realize that without policy changes to existing law, there would be no solar market in this country. And these slides truly demonstrate the success that SEIA, our state chapter SEIAs, Vote Solar, and others have had in opening up markets around the United States. Today, over half of the states in this country have more than 5 megawatts of solar, and the majority of the U.S. population lives in states that have more than 50 megawatts installed. So more and more people have a relative or a friend working in the solar industry. And this fact alone is having an impact on how the public perceives solar energy. The other amazing statistic from the SMI report is that the quarter over quarter, the national weighted average system price fell by 22%. So we're continuing to see solar become more cost competitive. If you're interested in learning about any of these statistics or other market trends happening in the industry, I recommend you go to SEIA's website and download the SMI study. It really is a signature document for the entire industry. But it would be misleading for me to tell you only about the sunny side of this story. For many in our industry are suffering through the worst of times, and some of us are acting as if we are in the age of foolishness, which could lead to the season of darkness that Dickens spoke of. Let me state this as clearly as possible. Our industry is under direct attack, and it could affect your company, your livelihood, and our industry's very existence. We are being attacked on multiple fronts. Conservative super PACs and the oil industry are funding an attack on clean energy, both through the airwaves and through conservative politicians. They are coordinating to produce a huge volume of negative ads targeted at us. Reports have shown that 81% of attack ads have focused on clean energy in this campaign. And they're expected to spend over $1 billion in negative ads in this election cycle. The collateral damage to our industry could be massive. These same PACs have pressured conservative politicians to make clean energy a political issue in Washington and at the state level. So why do you care? Why should we care? Because this campaign has targeted clean energy tax credits. Bills have been introduced earlier this year in both the House and the Senate that eliminate the investment tax credit. In the House, Congressman Pompeo, who represents the Koch brothers' home congressional district, introduced a bill with 28 co-sponsors that rolled back incentives for all clean energy, including the expiration of the ITC at the end of this year. One of those co-sponsors was Paul Ryan, the same Paul Ryan who's now running for vice president. And in the other chamber, in the Senate, Senator DeMint offered an amendment to the Senate transportation bill that would abolish renewable energy incentives, and it gained 26 votes across 20 states. We have a problem when senators representing states with strong solar industries vote against their constituents, and that is exactly what has happened. Even right here in Florida, Senator Rubio voted against the 300 solar companies that call the Sunshine State home. I mentioned Congressman Ryan's co-sponsorship of the Pompeo bill before, but the Ryan budget that we've heard so much about also calls for repealing all incentives for clean energy, including the ITC, not in 2016, but this year. And now we have a presidential candidate who outright rejects the wind production tax credit and has stated that he will roll back tax incentives for industries. We are also under attack at the state level, and in some of the states that are our largest markets, and that we assume were safe for solar for many years to come. The reality is that we can't count on them remaining that way without significant effort by all of us. There are 37 states with either an RPS or a renewable energy goal. Take a look at Colorado, for example. They are a leading state for solar energy. Well, the Koch brothers have funded an organization that has filed a legal challenge against the Colorado RPS, seeking to strike it down by claiming that promoting the use of solar energy somehow violates the Constitution. This threatens not only the Colorado RPS, it threatens all state RPSs. And SEIA has intervened in this case, and we will fight it as hard as we can. For if our opponents win here, then they will take their anti-solar campaign to every other state that has an RPS, all 37 of them. We all know the Koch brothers will spend whatever it takes, unless they feel the pushback from our industry, until they hear our strong and unified voice against them, and they realize that the solar industry is willing to fight back. SEIA is fighting every single day to protect the solar industry, to provide that strong, unified voice. But we need you to be with us. And if that wasn't bad enough, net metering is also being challenged across the country. In California this year, the industry fought to raise the net metering cap to accommodate the success that we were having in California. At the leadership of SEIA's state policy team, led by Carrie Hipp and Sarah Birmingham, we were successful. But the sad truth is that we will have to address this issue again this fall and again next year in California. And again, this is occurring across the country. Utilities are united in dismantling net metering laws. Again, if we don't fight back with a unified voice, we will lose our ability to access and compete in the electricity marketplace. So let me ask you, are we going to stand back and let the Koch brothers, Karl Rove, and the conservative super PACs push us around? Hell no! We are going to continue to step up and fight each and every one of these challenges. This is a battle that SEIA has been waging for the last year, ever since Solindra's bankruptcy. And I am proud to say that SEIA's board of directors has recently approved a strategic media campaign in key swing states to push back on the negative messaging on solar energy. And we are not, we are not going to allow solar to suffer from the billion-dollar negative ad campaign of this election. We cannot. I want to now share with you a personal story, a story that I've told some of you before, but which is more true today than ever before. A few months ago, I was cleaning out my attic in my house in Washington, D.C., and I came across an old telescope that I had as a kid. And I pulled it out to see if it still worked, and at the bottom of the box, there was a magazine. And later that night, I flipped through the magazine and came across an article titled "The Dark Days for Solar," and it was written in July of 1987, exactly 25 years ago. And as I read it, I got chills because of how strikingly similar it was to today's events. It told the story of the downfall of the solar industry and the investment tax credit in the mid-'80s due to terrible mistakes made by our industry. Mistakes that we must learn from and ensure we never make again. So I need you to listen, and listen closely, as I take you back to the mid-'80s, and it starts off with this paragraph. When the Solar Energy Industries Association met for a strategic meeting last year, the members had one item on their wish list: survival. Only 15 people showed up to represent an industry that once numbered 267 manufacturers, 6,000 distributors, and 30,000 employees. The solar industry today is a shadow of its former high-flying self. Low oil prices, the demise of tax credits, slashed research funds, and charges of fraud, high prices, and poor quality have sent the solar industry into a tailspin. Sales have dropped by 80 to 90% from their highs in 1985. The article then goes on to outline why the solar industry imploded in the mid-'80s, and there were two primary reasons. First, Congress was taking up fundamental corporate tax reform, and the second was that our industry became greedy. Individual companies used unscrupulous business practices and were discovered and reported by the Wall Street Journal and other papers. We found that companies abused the tax code by using solar financing arrangements for systems that inflated the price of solar equipment well beyond the fair market value of the systems and claimed excessively large tax credits. Systems were installed that fundamentally didn't work or didn't perform as advertised. And these activities led to massive investigations, prosecutions of fraud, and ultimately, confidence in our industry was eroded. We lost the public trust. The result was that the solar investment tax credit expired and the industry shrank to 10% of its size within 18 months. So it was a confluence of events. Thriving market that attracted political attacks, congressional initiative on tax reform, and companies getting greedy. Does this sound familiar at all to people? These same events are starting to play out in many ways today. Congress will take up corporate tax reform this next year. We can't change that. But what we can make sure is that our industry is playing by the rules. We are smarter now. We must approach these times with wisdom, not foolishness and greed. Otherwise, we face the exact same consequences that our industry faced in the 80s. Here's the problem. I can see a clear pattern developing today, just like there was 30 years ago. We must avoid making the following mistakes. Companies improperly or deceptively inflating the basis or the cost of their system, resulting in an excessive tax credit, which is illegal. Companies inflating the basis for the 1603 Treasury program. The U.S. Treasury Department is now scrutinizing all applications, resulting in long delays. I'm sure many of you have experienced that. This is an example of how improper actions of a few can have serious consequences for our entire industry. The third is leases with exorbitant escalation rates are a major cause for concern. While this may not be illegal, excessive escalation rates are unethical and will hurt all of us. I have heard of a leasing model with an escalation rate in excess of 10%. That means a person paying $100 per month today will spend almost $700 a month for that same system at the end of the lease term. That is unethical and unfair. And this is not Rhone being a little paranoid up here either. The October 2012 issue of Consumer Reports that will arrive in mailboxes, millions of mailboxes next week, identifies some solar energy business practices as the biggest scam in the United States today. Let me repeat this. Consumer Reports is warning the public that fraudulent business practices in the solar industry are happening around the country, and it's one of the biggest scams facing consumers today. I can already imagine the phone calls I'm going to be getting from Capitol Hill, from our solar champions. But I also expect I'm going to be getting one from my mom, too, saying, what the hell's going on? I mean, this is crazy. This is going to have an impact on all of us who are trying to run legitimate businesses. When companies cross over the threshold of ethics and the law, they put the entire industry at risk. 100,000 jobs, decades of hard work and innovation at risk, all for the sake of one company's greed. Okay, we've been here before. We know what happens when an industry loses the public trust. So let's take action now. These illegal or unethical practices must stop. SEIA will expel any member that violates our code of ethics because we believe as an association that maintaining the integrity of the industry is far more important than making a quick buck. State and federal incentives, including the ITC, because you will get caught. That we don't install systems that don't work as promised. Instead, have pride and make sure that every system you install performs. In fact, performs better than advertised. And I encourage all of us to read SEIA's Code of Ethics. Every one of our 1,000 member companies are required to sign it before their membership is approved. But this is a code that the entire industry should follow. So get ready. We are facing some significant challenges, both internally and externally. And this is going to be a battle, but one that we must have. One in which you must engage, and one in which support of the entire industry. And we will need each one of you to participate in this campaign at this critical moment in our industry's evolution. You can start by joining SEIA and engaging actively in our efforts. I cannot emphasize the importance of this enough. We need resources, and we also need voices to make this campaign work. And after joining SEIA, get involved. The world is run by those who show up. Participate in our campaign. Write letters to your editors. Sign up your company on solarworksforamerica.org. Meet your congressman and your senator and let them know that their vote against solar will result in 1,000 votes against them in the next election. But I know we can win. If we work together as an industry, we can have one of the most powerful grassroots in any industry. We can defeat our opponents if we work together. It's as simple as that. But working together, we will also create the best of times for all solar companies. For today, we do truly have everything before us. A future where by 2016, solar installations total 10 gigawatts annually. A future where we employ 250,000 Americans. A future where we work with utilities rather than do battle with utilities. And a future where we as an industry unify all Americans rather than divide them as an issue. Together, and only together, we can achieve this future. Thank you very much.